Welcome to the Startup Help Desk. This is your source for answers to questions about starting companies, building companies, and the meaning of life. We're here to help answer all the questions submitted by founders just like yourselves by a panel of experienced investors, founders, and entrepreneurs. My name is Sean Burns. I've been a founder for about 20 years of companies like Flurry and Outlier. I more recently came over to the investor side with a new firm called Near Horizon. And I'm joined on our panel by the illustrious crew of Ash and Nick.
Hi, everyone. My name's Ash Rust, and I'm a pre-seed investor based in San Francisco. I mostly invest in companies based in the US and the UK at the idea stage through my fund Sterling Road. I've also worked at places like Trinity Ventures as an entrepreneur in residence and Bullpen Capital as an advisor. Before investing, I was an entrepreneur myself, most notably an early employee at the social media company Clout, as well as the co-founder and CEO of SendHub. These days, I spend most of my time coaching founders, and I've helped more than 1,500 startups over the years.
Hey, this is Nick Melionis. I'm co-founder and CEO of Navi. Our thesis is that these skills that make the best founders are the same skills that every person and organization needs to succeed in the world of tomorrow. Our solutions help them make the innovation magic happen. I've supported hundreds of startups and folks on their innovation quests, and I can't wait to get started with today's questions.
And Nick really can wait, because before we get to the questions, Nick, let's remind everybody, if they have questions, we would love to answer them on a future episode. Head over to thestartuphelpdesk.com.
We would love it. LOVE.
There's no doubt about that.
That's right. Or find us on X/Twitter at thestartuphq. HD, the Startup HD. Did I just say HQ? We should get the HQ too, but HD.
Now we have to, obviously. Congratulations on adding $8.99 to our annual budget here.
Today, all of our questions are about employee problems. If you have a company, hopefully eventually you'll have employees. If you have employees, at some point you will have problems. We get a lot of questions about dealing with employee issues. And so today's episode, we've rolled up a bunch of them. We will tackle them as best we have. As a quick preview, I actually feel like I've had most of these problems at some point. I will tell those stories as we get there. But
as a self-reflection.
Yes, I've been the problem employee.
Right,
I haven't been.
Right. Just want to make sure we're clarifying for the audience.
Okay, our first question, Ash and Nick. What if a technical co-founder is hardworking and determined, but underperforming? What can or should I do? It's a good question, Ash. What do you think, man?
So when I hear this, and I hear it a lot from founders, I think the first question I always ask is, are you doing one-on-ones every week or every 2 weeks? And the usual response is to get pretty defensive and say, oh, we talk every day. But one-on-ones are not the same. And, giving people the space to rant and complain and just express themselves in both directions is really important. So first and foremost, are you doing one-on-ones with this person and giving them the feedback on what they need to improve? If you are doing that and we're still not making rapid enough progress, then I think third-party coaching is a great place to go. So executive coaching, and there's a lot of people that offer that either hourly or as part of perhaps a value add when you take investment from them. So definitely investing in those training programs or those kinds of individuals is a really good place to go next. If that still doesn't work and the person just isn't going to make it as the CTO or the technical co-founder, then you can find a new role for them. Obviously, being a senior engineer or an individual contributor is not the same role as being a technical co-founder at a startup. So maybe they'd be better suited for that. But if that does not work, then we're probably at the point of departure. And, you've got to make that hard decision sooner rather than later. And oftentimes, if you're honest with this person about what's expected, they'll come to the same conclusion you have.
I'm curious to ask, since you said you encountered this a lot, I feel like underperforming is a very qualitative metric. How often does it happen that one co-founder, the non-technical co-founder, thinks the technical co-founder is underperforming, but the technical co-founder disagrees and says, I'm performing? And I almost feel like you have to resolve that disconnect before you can improve performance, because if we don't agree, then how do we know if we're underperforming or not?
Yeah, so that I encounter less. It's actually more just that maybe the person, for me, in my portfolio at least, the person didn't realize how intense a startup was going to be. And so they, took 3 weeks off over Christmas or something like that. They haven't hit any deadlines in the last 90 days. It's usually very, very clear. It's less about whether or not the performance metric is agreed upon between the CEO and CTO, at least in my experience.
Gotcha. Well, Nick, we're counting on you to disagree. Nick, give us some disagreement.
We're
Let's
ready,
go.
Nick.
Yeah, let's do this thing. Well, one thing I wanted to start with is I remember back to my first startup, and Ash, this touches on you talking about setting up one-on-ones. We had gone a long time before even considering setting up a one-on-one and having these easy touch points. And so when we got to the topic of making sure that we were evaluating each other's performance and having a routine method to ultimately have these kind of conversations, we said, well, we need to have one-on-ones. And the question was, how do we do it, especially after we haven't done it for so long? So I wanted to just ask you one quick note on this. If you haven't done one-on-ones and the ship is already sailing, do you have any tips for somebody to break through with their first one-on-one? Because that's really challenging.
Yeah, I mean, I think that if you let the bitterness or issues fester, then one-on-ones can be very, very tough. I haven't had a lot of positive experiences where if you don't get ahead of this early, you can fix it. A lot of the time, if you let something go on for too long, like underperformance, then there's no real easy way back unless both sides are really game, and that's rare.
Yeah, that makes sense. The other piece I wanted to add on this is anytime there's a situation or you're pointing fingers at one another, I think a great method is to always start by just evaluating yourself. And I always like to start by thinking, is there something that I can do to improve my efforts? Because perhaps we haven't done a good job with expectation setting. Perhaps we haven't done a good job at actually doing customer discovery, for instance, to validate the product vision so that we can move with urgency. And so what I would say whenever you're in this situation is make sure to give yourself a proper review to understand, are there areas where you are falling short so that you can be able to approach this from a balanced perspective? And of course, the key thing is, as quickly as possible, have conversations around expectation setting and make sure you're seeing eye to eye on each other's performance and objective milestones to be able to make it happen. This is tricky though. To Ash's point, if you don't get ahead of it, then you're going to find yourself on the wrong side of the 8-ball.
It just made me so happy, Nick, that you're talking about my core thesis that expectation setting is the core of most conflict. And you bring it up and it makes me, I'm tearing up here, man. I'm so happy. You brought
He's
it
not
forward.
really crying. Don't listen to him.
It's all theater. But to your point, Nick, I've actually found a few times when you have an underperforming technical co-founder, it's because the technical co-founder had an unrealistic expectation of what success would look like. They thought they would start a company, orders would start flowing in, and they're just writing code to keep up with demand. And when it isn't like that, they're less motivated because they think the company's failing because their expectation didn't meet with what reality is, which is it's hard. It's just difficult.
Well, hang on. I hear you. Maybe you're investing in later stage companies or something, but the people that I'm investing in, literally, we had someone, a CTO, be like, I would need to do an acting class in Paris. And that's a priority for me.
Yeah.
I'm not kidding.
Okay,
that's a real story.
It sounds awesome. There's no doubt about that.
I mean, it does sound like there's a lot of personal development involved in that. I agree.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, in their defense, there was I don't know if you heard the story. There was a great story in the early days of Twitter that they had to ask Jack Dorsey to stop taking fashion designing classes and focus on the business because he was spending too much time on his side project of learning fashion design and making clothes. He managed to turn it around somehow.
Yeah. And
that's a wild story. I did not know that.
That might have accelerated the pathway to Square too.
Now, you could actually argue he never did turn it around. I'm not going to make it.
Now we're just in the seventh circle of hell when it comes to the app formerly known as Twitter. Perfect.
Yes. Okay, let's move on before we go too far down the Silicon Valley soapbox here. Ash, what else is on our question for you?
All right, question number 2. I have a great engineer who does amazing work, but just cannot show up on time. We are all in the office at 9 a.m., but they show up around noon, even after repeated discussions about it. What can I do to get them on the same schedule as the rest of us?
I love this. And I want to challenge the foundation of this question. I think ultimately the question is, do you truly need this person to be there at 9 a.m.? Alternatively, is it better that you have this great engineer who does amazing work and they're working too late into the evening because that's just simply the rhythm they've built that allows them to produce magical outputs? If that's the case, then in a lot of ways, you want to lean into their unorthodox work style so that you can be able to give them a chance to thrive. That is one of the advantages.
Even if they can't show up to meetings, like important early morning meetings at like 10:30 a.m.
I mean, 10:30 a.m. should be ample time to get rocking.
But this dude's coming in at noon.
Yeah, I mean, I guess my take is it possible to have that critical meeting at noon? I think that there's something to it when it comes to you have to find these ways to have arbitrage for a talent, and being able to accommodate an unorthodox schedule is one that could help you get there. That's my take on that one, though, Sean.
Oh, man. I think so. It's interesting, Nick, that we usually agree. I usually disagree with Ash. This time, you and I are not on the same page. I feel like if you start contorting yourself to fit the behaviors of your team, the team is running the company and you're not running the company. I'm all about being flexible. I think it's great to be able to be flexible. But to me, the core part of this question, if everybody else is starting work at 9 and this person's rolling in at noon, they're missing hours of work. And all work is collaborative. I don't care if you're writing code or selling or marketing. Your team has to work together to achieve goals. If somebody can't be on the same schedule as everybody else, they're not really part of the team. The rest of the team is kind of contorting themselves to work around this person. I think it's a horrible precedent to set because this person is forcing you to work around their schedule. Somebody else might force you to work around their other bad habits. And all of a sudden, your company is this weird Swiss cheese of bad habits you're avoiding and things you're not doing. And that doesn't sound like a healthy outcome. I don't think it's too much to ask. You're not asking them to come in at 6 a.m. Mm-hmm. I mean, you're not even asking them to come in, irregular hours. If your company starts at 9, that's fine. That's when your company starts. And there have to be good people that want to do that. You're not making unrealistic expectations. I actually think the employee is making an unrealistic expectation by saying, I get to work the hours I want to work regardless of what the company expects of me. And there are companies that don't care when you work, and maybe they should go work at one of those. I think that's a part of corporate culture. You get to decide. But if you've already decided, then that's how it is. By the way, I didn't have this situation. I had something similar. The only time in my life when I've had a performance improvement plan, a PIP, actually work was somebody with a similar situation where they were good at their job, but they couldn't fit the schedule the rest of their team was on. We had to put them on a PIP, and they managed to rise to the occasion and shifted their working and were able to meet what their team was doing. And I've never seen a PIP work except in this one specific case.
That is a good situation. Ash, do you have a tiebreaker on this one?
Well, yeah, I was going to ask, Sean, so you're willing to have someone leave then if they don't adhere to the timings, right?
I think with this kind of egregious thing, I think I would be. If it was like, listen, most of the people come in at 9, this person comes in at 9:30 or 10, I wouldn't care as much. But if you're talking about 3 hours, I mean, it's a lot of time that you're losing out in collaboration. So I think that, yes, I would worry about the precedent it was setting for the rest of the team.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's fair. I think you can flex a little, but not a lot.
Agreed.
Yeah, we got to avoid the Swiss cheese of challenges, as Sean mentioned here. So seems like an appropriate tiebreaker.
The really strong dairy metaphors.
Only mozzarella level issues are allowed.
I can buy into that.
We need to have you running Gouda teams here, guys. Come on.
Yeah, you can count me in on changing my tune.
There's no hiding. Now we've set him off. We shouldn't have done that. And dairy has way too many.
What kind of monster have you created?
I warned you. I told you.
Oh, goodness.
Oh, Nick, save us with a question.
All right, let's do this. Here's the third question that we received from a founder. This founder said, I am suspicious that one of our BDRs has more than one job. They aren't always available for team meetings and seem not to work full time. They are still booking meetings. Should I do anything about it? Sean, want to take it away here?
So I have to start this with a story first, which is there's a company that I work with. I won't say what the name of it is, but they did have a BDR that was a somewhat top performer. And they found out this BDR had 2 jobs because another company put them on the NASDAQ screen in Times Square as their employee of the month.
No way.
That is so good.
I swear to God, it was just absolutely hilarious. It's an amazing way to find out about this. So that story aside, I think that the first thing I would say is it's possible they have more than one job. I mean, it does happen, especially in the early 2020s. There was lots of stories about it. Before we start worrying about jobs and how many jobs they have and these sorts of things, the first thing is I think it's important to think about outcomes. It's less important about how somebody's working and more important about are they generating the outcomes that you need them to generate. So my first question about this BDR, they're booking meetings. Are they hitting their targets? Are they hitting their goals? If they are, that's good. The second question is, are those goals sufficient? Are we really challenging our team, or can they so casually hit their goals that they have time to get a second job? Let's figure that out first. Then I start wondering about, okay, it's important that they can hit team meetings though. Team meetings shouldn't be optional. Like team meetings should be part of working. You shouldn't have constant team meetings like 4 or 5 a day. And so if somebody can't hit a team meeting, that's probably a core part of their job that might be driving the outcomes that you need to have happen. So I think more in terms of outcomes. I worry a lot less about how people are working. They need to, just based on our previous conversation about engineers, they have to be able to collaborate with their team and come to team meetings. But let's say they start doing that. I'm not so much worried about what somebody's doing in their free time if they are generating those outcomes. This BDR that had 2 jobs that was on the NASDAQ screen was one of the best performing BDRs at that company. And so do we care so much they have 2 jobs? There are legal concerns and other things, but until you really see somebody underperforming, I wouldn't worry so much about what people are doing on their own free time. That's my perspective. Ash, what do you think?
Yeah, I think finding good BDRs is really, really hard. And if you find one that's working out and they want to stay in that job, that's a real rarity. So, if they're performing, that's probably okay. Definitely provide feedback and set boundaries around things that are critical that they've perhaps tried to avoid attending or say they can't attend. That's, I agree, not acceptable. But yeah, you should turn this around and ask yourself if you're okay losing this person on principle, or are you okay with them, kind of being irritating or annoying that they're doing this. Everyone has attacks, and if they're a top performer, that is a pretty important piece of the job. Now, I will add that culture matters. So if somebody isn't really a member of your employee community, if they're actively avoiding participating in any way except just their specific outcomes, then that's not a good look. And I think if you had a whole team of people that had multiple jobs, then you're probably not looking at a good set of outcomes for the company. So you can maybe look the other way in 1 or 2 cases, but it can't become a cultural norm.
Let's say it wasn't a BDR. Let's say it was another position that may not be as hard to find, content marketing person. I'm not sure what roles are easy to hire for right now. Is that still true? If it's easy to find them, it's easy to find a replacement that is all in?
Well, if this person isn't meeting all their expectations, then yes, I think they're more likely to go in an environment that's less competitive for the role, for sure. So yeah, I think if you're in a role that has a lot of applicants per job and you're not able to contribute beyond just the specific outcomes, like you can't attend team meetings, then you're going to end up getting replaced a lot faster than if you were in a role where maybe you're an individual contributor on the engineering team and your research is world beating.
That's fair. Kind of rolling up all 3 questions. I'm going to say something. You guys tell me if you agree or disagree, which is...
I disagree.
There we go. End episode.
That was good.
At the core of all employee problems is you have to realize that if you don't address an employee problem, you're essentially saying it's okay. It's becoming part of your corporate culture. And there's always a question. I think, Ash, you mentioned people have attacks. There's this line between how much flexibility do you give people versus making sure there are lines and the company culture has structure and it's not clear that everything is okay, that there are structured limits. And that's the balance of management, right? In dealing with these sorts of issues. Would you agree with that or no?
Yeah, I think it's around the flex enough, but not too much principle.
The piece I'll add is that ultimately small problems become compounding problems if you don't address it early. And so then if you've got principles in terms of how you want to run your company and build your company, then you do want to be principled about saying we are going to ignore this because we're placing a bet that it's okay for that to be something that compounds into our culture. And if you do look at something and recognize that it could become a bigger issue, then being proactive to address it is sadly the only way to make sure it doesn't become a snowball that runs your company into the ground.
Well, on that note, before Ash and Nick can talk to me about my performance, let's wrap up this episode on employee problems.
Did I mention I disagreed?
There you go. A lot of answers to questions about employees. If you have a question, we would love to answer in a future episode, whether or not it's about employee problems or not. Find us at thestartuphelpdesk.com or thestartuphd at Twitter/X. As always, Ash and Nick, thank you for your bestowing knowledge upon us.
Yeah, thank you both.
Thank you.
Yes, thank me. That's right. Thank me. We will be back, but for now, the Startup Help Desk is closed. We look forward to helping in the future. In the meantime, good luck in building your business.